Welcome back to All Things Rugby, and once again, I'm delighted to be joined by Mr. Steve Noble from Rugby Asia 24/7. Steve, how are you, sir?
I am well, but also disappointed with Japan, which I know we're going to jump into, but I'm doing well. It's another, we were discussing off air. It's never a boring week in rugby. So yeah, you can't complain.
Yeah, man. Well, look, let's go into the match straight away, right? Because that first half was such a good contest, right? Like, not just the scoreboard, but Japan were moving the ball and finding gaps like we knew that they would, and they can. Obviously, Australia came with such a stronger team in parts, like the likes of Lucan being back, Carter Gordon being back. But then that second half, I've not seen Australia play that well second half of rugby, and also I've not seen Japan, you know, not score in that long as well. So yeah, what are your takes on the game?
It's exactly that. And in hindsight, I kind of needed to pat myself on the back because when I did a little pre-match two preview, all the things happened as I thought they might happen in a worst case scenario for Japan. But it's not to take away all the progress they've made, obviously, in one half of rugby, but it shows the gulf still that exists. And I mean, Australia is only a few places above them in the world rankings for what it matters. And like you said, for 40 minutes, Japan were in there. It was all the exciting, good stuff we love to see. They were splitting that Wallabies defense open at will, but then again, not converting in the 22, getting turned over all game long. And as that game went on, in the first match was interesting because we talked about the likes of Tupou or players coming on and making any difference. I mean, this game, the bench came on, is blew Japan away. And like you said, when's the last time you've seen Japan be scoreless? So what did they concede in the end? 35 points in a row without scoring. So except you've got to give credit to the Wallabies, got to give credit to Leskis. I think there's certain positions, they've built up really good depth, obviously, before he's come in. And it's looking a little bit rosier for them. And I know we're going to talk about fixtures to come, but I think it's their next month are going to give us a more realistic litmus test of where the Wallabies are at.
Yeah, I think that for everything Japan are doing well with, and everything we discussed last week, their depth, they're bringing youngsters in. There is still then that gulf between someone who is a very talented rugby player and someone who's been and done it, right? And I think a prime example is when you look at dropping Fraser McWright to the bench, who we know is one of the best open sides in the world, and then you start Carlo Tizzano, who's a little bit out of favour with Australian rugby, which under the last regime, which is crazy because his Super Rugby form's been so good. And he is getting turnover after turnover after turnover. And then when you do bring on Fraser, he then carries it on. So your substitution has become, an 80-minute, it doesn't matter which way you go. And I think that that's then, as much as Japan are building that depth, there is still such a drop off between who is starting and who is coming on sometimes. And, you know, they have now obviously got, and again, we'll talk about it, like 12 months coming up to the World Cup, but they still want to do well in the Pacific Nations Cup. And then they still want to do well at the back end of the Nations Championship. So there's a lot still of work to be done, but that second half, I mean, I, I was looking at it going, what is Eddie going to say to this? And I text during the game and I was like, is he actually going to hold his hands up and go, no, Australia were that much better? Or is he going to find every flaw under the sun and go and try? And that is what as I said, I know I took a little bit of heat for it, but I love Eddie for that, right? Eddie is not scared to call things out, but he's going to go and work on that and drill him. And you have no doubt that the next time Japan play, even though they've got it's a friendly coming up, they're going to be better because of this.
Yeah, I think Eddie Jones on the broadcast after that first game, you could see he was frustrated because, like we all said, I think he knew there was a game they should have won. Um, this time, I didn't catch it on the broadcast, but the quotes that JRFU sent out, I'll read out to you. So this is from Eddie Jones himself. And to his credit, I don't think he's making excuses. I think he's just acknowledging they're not the finished product. So he said the opponents had a lot of possession and Japan ended up spending a long time in the defensive. I think in order for Japan to compete properly against such an opponent, we need to maintain more than 50% possession. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to win. Today, our aerial battles and lineups didn't work very well. We had problems at the breakdown, and when we're forced to go defensive in those situations, it became a difficult game for us. And he nailed it because those are the things we could see in that game. The lineup was terrible. Like Well, they had under 65%, I think, of their own lineouts. And when you have Warner Jones and Harry Hawkins, who are 500 meters tall, it's like ridiculous they should lose that many balls at the lineouts. And that just caused this like knock-on effect for them because they were on the back foot. I know Dylan Riley had a lot of criticism because of the missed tackles, and the whole team was poor in that stat department. But I think to Dylan Riley's credit, that he's not been the player this year that he was last year, but he was doing a lot of reactionary defense because of missed ball at lineouts, and he had new players at center. So that's not to give him a complete freebie out of having a challenging game, but he was reacting to poor lineouts and things going on around him. Wallabies were turning them over every second ball. So I think Eddie Jones got it nailed on. Like they did struggle with that high ball. They've got a lot of exciting players, but a lot of short players. I mean, both their wings, their 9, their 10, are all well under 6 foot. So it's just an area that teams are not going to target them game in and game out, right?
Yeah, I feel their pain. Um, yeah, look, I think for the top end of rugby, we say that if you have a dominant set piece, you're in chance of Test rugby, and vice versa. Like, if you cannot secure your own ball line out wise, and I think they made 40 plus missed tackles, right? Now, don't get me wrong, that stat sometimes is a little bit of not a throwaway stat, but you don't compliment the attack enough, right? And I actually think that Australia's attack, they often score more than 30 points in a game, right? They just often concede. And I put it into the group. The last 10 matches they played, they concede on average 28, 29 points. You can't win top test rugby by conceding that. So for them to come out and dominate that second half how they did, I mean, that's a massive, big tick for Australia, right? Like, and whether it's the Les Kiss regime or, whatever else is going on in Australian rugby, they are still stacking now wins. And they now have to go to Argentina, which is a completely different style of rugby. I did hear today that like Matera's out and a couple of other changes have come in, but look, Argentina at home we saw the Springbok game was just a nasty breakdown game, right? We saw England was not only scrappy off the ball, but like physical as anything. We know how good Argentina can be. And I think that's a real test now for Australia. And it's almost like it's actually a shame. Australia are going to get such a good opportunity to compete against the likes of Argentina now, which is only going to help them almost whatever the outcome, unless they get absolutely trashed. Like such a positive for them. Whereas Japan now going into the Pacific Nations Cup, you'd have to say that like these first two games, that friendly and that first match, are they ever going to get what they need to then even Fiji? We hope, we said this last week. We hope that Fiji come out guns blazing way better than they did Nation Championship. But again, like you're still talking about that ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th in the world. Whereas Australia have got Argentina and then they've got Bledsoe. And you're like, okay, well, now we can really look and see where we're at pre-Nations Championship, pre-World Cup. What did Japan do? Because that Nations Championship, look, it's great opportunity for them, right? It's 6 games against the top 10 in the world, call it, right? Do they need more? Does it kind of undermine Pacific Nations Cup if they rotate and they put almost like not second string, but even now they're playing university players that haven't got a club side. What does that do to the competition,
I think a couple of things there. I think with Australia going to Argentina and then having to face the Springboks and the All Blacks afterwards, like I said, they're coming into their toughest grouping of matches. The game they beat Japan was the best half of rugby we've seen from the Wallabies since they beat South Africa in South Africa. And that was only a year ago, which is incredible to think about. For Japan, I think they need to use this test against Canada and the Pacific Nations Cup games to. I mean, who else can he blood in to bring new? He kind of needs to give players game time to get their confidence up, to get things working. Because, like you said, he's got Canada. They play USA in the semi-final. If you assume they win that, but USA is a team on the up as well, and they play whoever in the final. Then they go and play. Was it Wales, England, Scotland? So they're playing 3, 4 games teams around them in that rankings, and then they're taking a big jump up if you look at England and Scotland. And I think you can't really take your foot off the brake. I also just don't know, like, who are the players Eddie Jones is not selecting or who are unlucky to be selected. The only guys I can think of who aren't there because they're injured, rather than a like for like better player that hasn't been playing these games. They're all in preseason now in JRLO. We've seen the last 2 weeks all those respective clubs posting photos of new players who are in camp and new coaches. So I mean, I don't think he has a massive pool to draw from in terms of players he can replace who he has.
Yeah, and I think that you made a very good point. They just need more game time now. Like, there's a lot to be said about, we say the same whether it's England or we say the same whether it's, even the box, right? And we always compare to kind of that top level. But sometimes you just need to give them the shirt and see what they can do. And I think like Ruben Love's a prime example of that. But, I'll probably take a little bit of stick for this, but I actually think that bringing Richie Mwanga out can have the opposite effect sometimes. And I know that Rennie came out and said that he had spoke to everyone beforehand and everyone's looking forward to it. I actually hope that Ruben Love gets the shirt, stays in the shirt. And as much as I love Richie Mwanga and will love watching him play, when you've got someone like Ruben Love that he's got that continuity now with the shirt, let him do it. But then even Josh Jacob, I think Josh Jacob had a good game the other day. But at the same time, you're like, well, does Richie start against the Lions, come on against the Lions? And I think that that's where, someone like Ito, he's he's got that momentum. He kind of needed not necessarily a bad performance, but he needed to have his back against the wall now, and a pack that is going backwards, which is always the 9-10. If you've got a pack going forward, you are laughing. But the moment the ruck's messy, the moment that you're getting 6-second rucks, the moment that your line speed of Wallabies was putting Nito under such pressure that his kicking's on the back foot, or he's looking at a pass that he's trying to force. And I think the other thing, Hugh made a really good point in our chat during in the match. They were making mistakes up front, but then they didn't have the scramble to even fix it as well. And I think that that is then also the difference between that top level team and, from 8 downwards in the rankings, that when there is a mistake, is there someone that is either quick enough, fast enough, technical enough, spatially aware enough to then cover up that mistake? But they're only going to get that from getting time. All of these university players, you would hope they're going to get now a decent club run, but they are missing preseason, which
I mean, this is probably a better test of yourself than a preseason in your club playing international test match rugby. I agree with what you're saying. I don't think I don't think Ito had the worst game necessarily. Yes, back foot wasn't as influential, but in that first half, he was still at times had the ball in a string in terms of a couple of grubbers behind defenses. His stepping was causing big forwards problems. I pointed to three areas in the first game that they never addressed in the second game are going to continue to be problems against good opposition. That was the defense out wide gets beaten too easily. The first Australian ball that went wide, they scored a try from, and they did the same thing in the first test. So they're getting found out far too easily when the ball goes wide. We've mentioned the breakdowns. There's been a bit of criticism about the loose forwards that they've been selecting and where they are compared to Japanese teams in the past. Something's not right in the balance of the loose forwards, and he hasn't stuck with a consistent loose trio. I like Ben Gunter. I think he's come on leaps and bounds. There's still people who are criticizing him, but his stats, I think, are positive. I don't know how you can be so critical of him, but something in the balance here is not right because obviously they're not getting turnovers. They're not clearing the rucks and giving their players time. And the third thing which I keep bringing up is they can create chances all day long from these exciting young players breaking the defensive lines, but the number of times they don't score by getting in the 22, I think it reads as one of the worst stats amongst the top 10 teams. And I don't know how you address that. I don't know if that's just decision making, maturity. Is it something that's coachable? I don't know, but that hasn't improved. Those three areas stayed bad and got worse, compounded by losing lineouts and things like that. So I'd like to see Eddie Jones stick with some similar players. I think the point you were making earlier, I don't know if anyone's comfortable that that jersey is theirs in the Brave Blossoms team. You'd probably argue Warner Durns is the exception. But everyone else, I think their jersey is up for grabs.
Yeah, I think that from a coaching point of view, if you look at the stats across the board over the last couple of seasons, once you get over 3 to 4 rucks, your chance of scoring goes massively down. And I think that then if you aren't going to adopt that kicking for territory game, even if it is the odd grubber through and take the line out and make the other team go 80 meters, which firstly, you need a good defense to say to them, go on, there's 80 meters of our turf, go and take it. But the second one is, can you milk the penalty and then get at least the free? And I think that's where Australia's 22 entries returned on average 5 points, right? Phenomenal. Like that is that's such a good attacking stat against, as I said, a team that did miss 40 tackles and didn't score in the second half. Okay, they still needed to do the work. So again, is that something now Eddie can adopt into it and go, right, our shape's looking really good, the variety in attack's really good. Can we kick under pressure and select the right kick? Can we actually kick from someone other than 10 as well? And I think that that is, such a, as years gone on in rugby, whether it's the 15 that's got a good kicking game, whether it's the 12 that's got a good kicking game, or whether it was the likes of James Lower Island, who all of a sudden has a good kicking game, like who else is there to support the halfbacks with that? So it isn't just box kick and or 10 kicking as well. But I have no doubt that like Eddie will spot this. Eddie has forgotten more about rugby than we will ever know. And he is never afraid to bring someone into camp to support him with that. So yeah, look, I still think there's lots of positives there. And I still think that if he gets everyone learning from that game, which, as I've said, no doubt he will absolutely review the hell out of that game. Pacific Nations Cup, you should be wanting to win this, like 100%. I think that even if you lose in the final to PG, that's probably a disappointment. And then carry that
Yeah, I agree.
momentum forward. And then,
Yeah, I
as I
agree.
said, the hardest bit then is making sure that these guys get enough game time for the rest of the season going into the next year.
I mean, injury aside, they should all have plenty of rugby because I think everyone in that Brave Blossoms team is back in Japan next season, right? Warner Burns is back from Hurricane. Saito is obviously back from Toulouse. Harada's back from Moana Pacifica. So I think pretty much everyone's going to be Japan based. There are a couple of players they haven't selected who have gone the other way to France, for example, the top 14. Maybe we'll see them in the next season. Um, uh, you mentioned something earlier I want to touch on because I kept singing the praises of the current fullback because he's been so accurate and scoring lots of points, but he had a poor game in that second test and he missed conversions and missed penalties. And suddenly again, it was one of those things that's added to their collapse in that second half. And maybe that's an option they need to look at as a second choice fullback or a different alternative. I wonder what Ito is like at fullback because someone like him with his amazing attacking abilities with more space from fullback. Yes, he's going to be challenged again under the high ball, but it'd be interesting to see him play a fullback. Maybe someone else slots into fly half, but I don't know where Eddie Jones is thinking of. I mean, you got to think as well. Like the last time they beat Canada, they won pretty comfortably. USA, I think, as well, but we've seen USA have come on much better, since last year's Pacific Nations Cup. Even in that Pacific Nations Cup, they knocked Samoa off their perch to qualify for the World Cup. So they are getting better results. But in terms of game time, like I said, they're going to have this set of 3 games of Pacific Nations Cup. They've got at least 4 tests in the end of the Nations Championship up in Europe. And then they don't have any break. They're straight into the start of the Japan Rugby League 1 season. So it's more about keeping those bodies healthy more than anything else, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, talking about USA, there was obviously a USA 15 versus an Argentina 15. And it was, 2 o'clock in the morning here. So I only caught the game after with some extended highlights. And it was quite an interesting one because Argentina had every trait that you'd expect from an Argentina team. A lot of flair, a lot of skill, very physical. This American side they put out, which there was a lot of rotation there. There was some very good play there. And I mean, there was one where they went out the back of the shape, they went out the back of the shape, they went out the back of the shape. And when they pulled the trigger on the front, it was like just slicing through butter. And you're like, okay, now we've got some variety there. Even the first couple of tries were both from mauls. And again, I think that when you see that a team is willing to do, don't get me wrong, Argentina's was from like 15, 20 meters out, which was impressive. But if a team is willing to go, we've got a good penalty, but we're still willing to go to the corner. Both Argentina and USA converted. I think that USA have definitely, for everything negative that's happened over in the MLR, and I read that even more changes are coming this year, that national team has developed. Now, it should because of how much money World Rugby have invested into it, like ideally. But again, they've got now what, 4 years until it's make or break time. And you'd think World Rugby now, with everything that's happening in MLR, still sitting there going, "Oh, I'm not too sure about this." And then, unfortunately, again, we can preview the Pacific Nations Cup more in a couple of weeks' time. But when you now remove two clubs from that, or two teams from that, sorry, going from 6 to 4 is huge. And what does that then do for Tonga and Samoa is a whole nother conversation that we can get into as well. So yeah, there's lots happening in this kind of, as I said, from 9 down to, you'd say 13 almost. And actually, if you look at then the Rugby European Championship and how the Nations Cup teams have performed, you'd say that like the likes of Portugal and Spain, Georgia have obviously always been there or thereabouts, but you'd say that like they're in with a shout now to really push on. And unfortunately, if the other side of the world doesn't fix up, we will see the likes of USA and Canada fall further behind.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say this time last year, I was more worried about USA and Canada, and I'm probably still a little bit worried about them because, like I said, they've got domestic issues to deal with. Aside from LRR and professional teams, there's lawsuits going on, and there seems to be constant drama there, despite the massive amount of money that World Rugby is putting in to make a World Cup hopefully work. But like I said, the USA they've had a good year in terms of tests. They came out in that first segment of the kind of Nations Trophy games good. They had this 15s win over Argentina. They could pull a surprise of Pacific Nations Cup, and then obviously we've got the second half of that Nations Trophy to kind of come. So yeah, maybe we'll judge them afterwards. Canada, I'm a bit more worried about. I also, because the US under 20s team didn't have an amazing tournament in Georgia recently. I think they were one of the bottom ranked teams. Although I think Japan played them and put them away pretty comfortably. So again, like in terms of the next group of players coming through, I don't know where they're at in terms of, how many of those guys are going to come out the next couple of years and push for players in the senior men's Eagles team.
I'm just going to quickly mention it. I know it's completely off topic, but you are a Bok at heart. And the under 20s going back to back is one thing, but the under 18s have put out two teams and are winning. Like I've never seen such a flex, right? And it's funny because again, briefly to mention, there's always this talk in the women's side of the game about England. If England put out a second team, where would they finish within the Six Nations, even against the likes of France? But for the box to put out two under 18 teams and both of them come away with wins, you're sitting there going, "Oh my God." Like, yeah, forget under 20s. This lot might dominate for years to come, which again,
Yeah.
money, investment, passion, the country, there's so many other bits to it, right? Like, and I saw a really interesting one just on South Africa the other day when everyone is talking about, and I'm the first to say it, every player that plays rugby in South Africa, the goal is to be a Springbok, right? Regardless of what club you're at, school you're at, level. But people still forget that, like, yes, it is huge there, but the Kaiser Chiefs, the football team, still get 15 or 20,000 at a game. So it's not like it is their only sport that people keep going on about, right? Like, it's incredible that the athletes that are coming through, and again, it's probably more to do with the economical state of South Africa that they turn to sport, and it's why kind of they're in a better position to develop. But man, oh man, how are you putting two teams in an international? One, I didn't even think that would be allowed, and I'd love to see go back and see when that was agreed and what the other clubs or teams, sorry, thought about it. But my oh my, that is.
I mean, it's been a bit of a golden era for South African sports. I mean, like you just mentioned, the under 18s, the 20s, the Springboks on a, what is it, 11-game winning streak at the moment, heading into this nervously excited for the series coming up against the All Blacks because I think it's going to be closer than some people are giving it credit for. You got the women who've just come off a 2-test series win in Fiji. The cricket's been doing well, like you mentioned, soccer. They were at the World Cup for the first time in a long time. And I mean, South Africa's needed sports to do well because it gives people an outlet for all the other nonsense that goes on in that country. So it's great that it has been a golden generation. And in rugby, like you said, in particular, Yeah, we could talk about all these different countries. We have those different chats about players being poached and, international clubs sending scouts. And they definitely are in South Africa all the time because of things like Craven Week. And despite all those challenges and despite the poor South African rand, so many players will choose to stay because they want to wear that green and gold one day in terms of the Springbok colors. And like I said, if they're doing so well at all these age group levels, and Rossi's signed on until when now? 2031, 2035. Like it's very difficult to be negative about South African rugby generally. And I even mentioned sevens because they're also the reigning men's champions. So there's a lot of comparisons, obviously, between this era of South African rugby and New Zealand rugby at its peak when they were completely dominant. But those are now the two most dominant eras that a single nation has had in rugby.
Yeah. So look, we obviously mentioned 18s, 20s, and you mentioned Craven Week there. Moves me nicely on to this side of the world, a little bit more Asian specific. So next week, I'm going to be heading to Sri Lanka for the first ever Asian Pacific Lions match, which when I first heard about it, you know, common friend of ours, Sabir, told me about it, and he was really passionate about getting this going. And I said to him, I said, brother, the moment you get it off the ground, we're here to support. Best of luck with it. And this guy fought and fought and fought. He ended up going all the way to the UK, signed the MOU with Northampton Saints. And next week, the Saints are going to Sri Lanka for a pre-season match. And, I think people forget they hear Sri Lanka and they're not in the World Cup. And if you're not following rugby like we do, and we've got, a worldwide editors group that chats about everything from America all the way through and everything in between. Sri Lankan University rugby has had 20,000 at a game constantly. New Zealand have now started touring Sri Lanka with an under 85 kilo team, which again is a whole nother concept from biobanding and, my S&C sciencey background loves. But the pictures that come out of Sri Lanka when the New Zealand's go over it is like, oh my God, this is incredible. And now what Sabir's managed to do with the Pacific Asian Lions is combine Japanese players, a little bit from Fiji going, and some of the names that are already signed up to play, are huge names, and they've got ambassadors such as Will Genya that's going to be out there helping. And then you've got Northampton Saints coming over for the week. And as part of that week, you've got a massive gala dinner, you've got a charity cricket match, which is incredible anyway. You've got coaching clinics going on with Phil Dowson. So there's so much other rugby that's happening this side of the world that I don't think it's the right time right now for World Rugby to go, let's invite everyone. Because again, I think that if you get it wrong, you kind of see what happened to Portugal. You get this spike, it goes down, and then you have to rebuild it again. But I do think that there's some hidden gems this side of the world, be it in India or Sri Lanka or, even across the road in the Emirates. There's so much happening this side of the world that I think people forget.
Yeah, I mean, I always keep saying it's like a broken record. I think when people think of Asian rugby, I know that they immediately think of Japan for good reasons, and they probably think of Hong Kong sevens. But there's so much rugby beyond that. And like you mentioned, a lot of the highlights there in terms of Sri Lanka rugby. Now, to counterbalance that a little bit, Sri Lanka rugby has been in a dark place the last few years in terms of being outside, suspended from A to rugby and world rugby and governance issues. They've got a new board in, so there's lots of new characters in place. But like I said, all these things they brought in are very positive. The schools rugby, like you said, attracts massive crowds. They've had former All Blacks as coaches at some of those schools. They attract good quality coaches. Their sevens program for the first time. They've got a 21 men of fully contracted seven players this season because it's a very big Asia seven season. So there's lots of positives to talk about in Sri Lanka rugby. I'm very jealous that you're going to be there in Sri Lanka because there's a lot planned in terms of, like you said, charity events, cricket events, the actual rugby itself. And this is planned, as far as I understand, to be a long-term endeavor rather than a one-off. And I mean, like you mentioned, Will Genya, because I interviewed him a few months ago because he's obviously finished in Japan. So he's one of the first players announced that's going to be playing. He's been playing back in Papua New Guinea, and this last weekend he was playing alongside Israel Folau in PNG club rugby. So lots of little side stories in this crazy game. Ed Quirk, for those who remember him, he's former Sunwolves as one of the players. You got Wasia Nakabao, Fijian, obviously. You got Nairovoro. There's a couple of Japanese guys that have been announced. So when they actually announce the final teams, I think it's going to be a great spectacle. And we constantly talk maybe more around sevens rugby about how it has sevens rugby has the ability to have a festival atmosphere and all these things outside of rugby. And these are the kind of events like the under 85 kilogram tours and these kind of, we call it exhibition style tour. Surely those things are only going to positively highlight the game.
Yeah, and I do think there's one for us. Not even that we've mentioned it, but even if we do like a semi-regular roundup to give the audience more of an understanding of just how global this game is. And don't get me wrong, it comes with its issues, right? And it's so funny. We talk about this quite a lot. Whether you're chatting to someone from England, the RFU, and the Premiership, or whether you're chatting to someone in Asia who, whether it's Cambodia or Vietnam, it's literally on paper the same issues that everyone is having, right? And it's so funny that this game is so global. The problems are so unanimous across the board. We love it and we talk about it all the time, how much we love it, right? But there is all these little stories that pop up that I really hope that, as all things rugby, we really want to shine a light on everything else that's going on. We do a lot of tier one coverage, and yourself, Carl from Rugby Through the Leagues does a lot of tier two stuff, which we love to try and support. So much so that we've actually had another conversation recently with a brand new British and Irish Lions expat team that will be taking on a Pacific Warriors team. Again, down in Australia, what an amazing opportunity to bring more expats into this good high level competition as whether they're going into Shoot Shield or whether they're going into potentially NPC, it's still raising that standard of game and competition, which is so good. And I think that outside of Europe, there is still so much happening,
Yeah.
and I really hope that we can keep shining that light on it. And big shout for anyone else that's involved in rugby, like get in contact with us if there is something that we aren't aware of that you want us to hear about or learn about. I know within European rugby, Ascent Rugby's obviously just announced that it's going to be on Rugby Pass as well. Carl's actually going to be commentating on that. So there's so much other stuff happening that I just hope that at some point we are sitting here going, I'm so glad we stuck with it, because God, when you're involved in this game, it's the best game in the world, like, and for all its frustrations and, whether you watch a game and you're like, God, this is really pulling my teeth out. On the flip side, you know, you're miles away from me, yet we've built this relationship. And, even you were saying about friends staying at yours, rugby has always had that ability that you can walk into any rugby club in the world. And the moment you are willing to have a diet 7 Up or a beer or a coffee, you play rugby, you like rugby, you're around rugby, you're welcome here. And this is the family. And I just think that that is such a amazing aspect of this game that, don't get me wrong, I don't like other sports, but this is, the principle of we all have the same problems. Why are we not all just working together a little bit more?
I mean, I agree with so much of what you said. Like, I don't think whoever's watching and listening to this, I think there's so many people out there like yourselves and people that you just mentioned that we're doing this because we're passionate about the game and we want it to succeed in all levels. And it's not succeeding at all levels for multiple reasons, even though those reasons are the same no matter where you go, which is so frustrating. And everyone's trying to find solutions. And like you just mentioned there, if I can name drop them, I'm going to do a video later this week about 5 tournaments people might not know are happening this weekend in Australia, for example, is the Bingham Cup. And for people who don't know what that is, it's the most inclusive kind of LGBT tournaments. It's been going for years. Look it up. Look at it's more than 40 teams from around the world, and also look at who it's in honor of, Mark Bingham. The World Deaf Sevens are happening in Japan later this year. Like I bet most people probably don't know that's happening. Every single team that's going is self fundraising and crowdfunding to be there. But it's the World Cup of Sevens for deaf teams. They've just announced the University Sevens are happening in Stellenbosch next month. They've only just dropped the teams yesterday, and Japan women are defending champions, which want to give them a shout. But the Japan men and women's teams are going to be there. There's so many amazing tournaments happening all over the place. I know our focus is often on the pro leagues and the test matches because that's where the big caliber players are. But I mean, I respect anyone who's out there at any level of rugby, from coaching grassroots and clubs and kids and social and women's and men's, and the list goes on. This game only exists because of people's passions driving it.
Well, there you go. That's our clip there for socials. A plea to everyone: get in touch with us if you're covering any type of rugby. We'd love to obviously hear about it. So, Steve, obviously, there's lots going on this side of the world. We have mentioned Japan have got a couple of friendlies for the Pacific Nations Cup. Australia going to be going into Argentina. Let the people know where else they can find you. What else is happening in Steve's world?
Uh, Instagram, Rugby Asia 24/7. Obviously, our website's always up to date. And I think the two things to look out for is we publish a pretty comprehensive guide of social tournaments in Asia. So again, that's more appealing to touring teams that are looking to come to the likes of Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Cambodia. There's so much rugby in the region.
Awesome. Well, look, it's always a pleasure. I look forward to chatting about Pacific Nations Cup in the next couple of weeks, as well as all of the other competitions that you'll be covering. Thank you very much for watching. Of course, follow Steve on all of his channels. We will link them in the description below. Like, follow, and subscribe. Everything that's happening, all things rugby, and we shall see you all soon.